This is the Unique Stories About Us, a program where I discover and discuss the strange and wonderful stories that surround us. So, without further ado, let us begin now.
Chapter 2, The Boar Hunt. When we had drunk a mug or two of tea, the soldiers began to load up the horses. Dersu also began to make ready. He pulled on his knapsack and picked up his rifle and prop. In a few minutes, the detachment was on the road, and Dersu came with us. The ravine along which we went was long and winding, with similar lateral ravines running into it from the sides, down which mountain streamlets came bustling. The gulch broadened out gradually into a valley. Here the trees had been blazed, which kept us on the trail. The gold marched ahead, keeping his eye fixed upon the ground. At times he would stoop to pick up a leaf between his fingers. "What is that?" I asked him. Dersu stopped and said that the path was not intended for horse traffic, but only for men on foot, that it led to sable traps, and that a man had passed that way some days previously, probably a Chinaman. The gold's words surprised us all. Noticing that we looked rather incredulous, he exclaimed, "How you not know? Look self." After this, he produced such indications that my doubts were scattered at once. It was all so clear and simple that I was surprised not to have noticed it myself. In the first place, there had been no sign of hoof marks, and in the second, none of the twigs on the shrubs bordering the path had been broken off, which would have been the case if horses had been that way, for the trail was narrow for them and the packs kept catching in the branches. The bends were so sharp that horses could not turn round, but were obliged to make little detours, and the tracks across the brooks always led to a tree trunk bridge, and never into the water. Besides, the blown-down branches lying about the track were not broken. All this showed that the trail was not suitable for caravans with pack animals. "Long time one man he go," continued the gold as though to himself. "Man he go finish, rain come," and he began to count how many days since the last rain. For a couple of hours we marched along the trail. Little by little the coniferous forest became mixed and broad-leaved trees more numerous: poplar, maple, aspen, birch, and lime. I wanted to halt again, but Dersu advised us to go on a little further. "We soon find hut," he said, and pointed to some trees from which the bark had been cut. I understood. It meant that in the neighborhood there must be something for which that bark was wanted. We pushed on, and in about 10 minutes saw a small hut on the bank of a brook, rigged up by some trapper or ginseng hunter. Looking round, our new friend repeated that a Chinaman had passed that way a few days previously and spent a night in the hut. The ashes of his fire, beaten down by the rain, the pile of grass that made his couch, and an abandoned pair of old gaiters of the coarse blue material locally called daba were clear evidence of that. I had by now realized that Dersu the Gold was no ordinary man. Before me stood a tracker, and involuntarily my thoughts went back to the delight of my boyhood, Fenimore Cooper and Mayne Reid. It was time to feed the horses. I decided to take advantage of the opportunity to lie down in the shade of a big cedar, and dropped off to sleep at once. In a couple of hours, Arsenyev awakened me, and I looked round. I saw Dersu splitting firewood and collecting birch bark and stacking it all in the hut. I thought at first that he wanted to burn it down, and started dissuading him from the idea. Instead of replying, he asked me for a pinch of salt and a handful of rice. I was interested to see what he was going to do with it, so told the men to give him some. The gold carefully rolled up some matches in birch bark, and the salt and rice, each separately in rolls of birch bark, and hung it all up inside the hut. He then started packing his own things. "You'll probably be coming back here one of these days, I suppose?" I asked him. He shook his head, so I then asked him for whom was he leaving the matches, salt, and rice. "Some other man he come," answered Dersu. "He find dry wood, he find matches, he find food, not die." I well remember how struck I was by this. It was wonderful, I thought, that the gold should bother his head about an unknown man whom he never would see, and who would never know who had left him the provisions. I thought how my men, on leaving a bivouac, always burnt up all the bark left at the fire. They did it out of no ill will, but simply for amusement, to see the blaze, and I never used to stop them from doing so. And here was this savage, far more thoughtful for others than I. Why is it that among town dwellers this forethought for the interests of others has completely disappeared, though no doubt it was once there? "The horses are ready, it's time to be off," said Arsenyev, coming up to me. I agreed. "Yes, it's time to be off. March," and I gave the word to the men and led off along the trail. Towards the evening, we came to the confluence of two streams, where it is counted that the Lyafu, the stream of happy hunting, begins. After something to eat, I turned in and fell asleep at once. When I awoke next morning, everyone else was already up. I gave orders for the horses to be saddled, and while the men were busy with the packs, I got the plane table ready and started ahead with the gold. From our campsite, the valley began to swing somewhat to the west. The left flanks were steep, the right sloping. With every mile, the trail became broader and better. At one spot, we found a tree that had been felled with an axe. Dersu looked at it and said, "Cut in spring. 2-man work. 1 man tall, his axe blunt, other man short, his axe sharp." For this astonishing man, there were no secrets. He saw everything that had taken place there like a clairvoyant. Then and there, I decided to be more observant and to try to understand tracking myself. Soon I saw another stump of a fallen tree with a mass of chips lying about, rich in resin. I understood that someone had been collecting chips for kindling, but beyond that I saw nothing. "Hut near," said the gold, as though in answer to my meditations. And in fact, trees stripped of bark soon became more frequent, and by now I understood what that meant, and a couple of 100 yards farther on the banks of a brook, in a small clearing, stood a cabin. It was a small building with walls of clay covered with bark. It seemed empty, as I concluded on seeing that the door was held shut from the outside by a stake. Round the hut was a small kitchen garden, well rooted by wild pigs, and on the left a wooden temple, as always, facing south. The interior was rough. An iron kettle, a greasy stove, from which led the flues to heat the kang, 2 or 3 wooden bowls, a wooden pitcher, an iron kitchen chopper, a metal spoon, a kettle brush, a couple of dusty bottles, a few bits of rag, 1 or 2 chairs, an oil lamp, bits of animal skins thrown on the ground that formed the entire domestic equipment. There were 3 trails leading up the valley of the Lyafu, the one by which we had come, one leading up into the hills on the east, and a third towards the west. The last was good for horses, and we went some way up it. The men let the reins drop on their animals' necks and let them choose their own road. The clever brutes went well, doing their best to prevent their packs catching in the branches. In the bogs and screes they did not jump, but first of all tested the ground with a foreleg before entrusting their weight to it. This dodge is characteristic of the local horses, accustomed to carrying packs through the taiga. From the trapper's cabin, the Lyafu bends slightly to the northeast. When we had gone about half a dozen miles, we came to a group of farmers' cabins on the right bank of the river, at the foot of a lofty hill called by the Chinese Tudinsi, the Earthy Ridge. The unexpected appearance of a military detachment startled the Chinese. I told Dersu to explain to them that they need not be afraid, and they went on with their work. I wanted to see what sort of a life the Chinese lived in the taiga and what work they did. A number of skins stretched out to dry, a pile of wapiti horns in a shed, bags of bear's bile used by the Chinese as medicine for trachoma, deer's fetus also used for medicine, lynx, marten, sable, and squirrel skins, and implements for traps, all showed that the local Chinese were engaged not so much in farming as in trapping. Round the cabins were a few plots of cultivated ground where the Chinese sowed wheat, maize, and millet. They complained of the damage done by wild pig and said that lately whole herds of them had come down from the hills and begun to ruin their fields. Consequently, they were obliged to take their crops before they were ripe. But now the acorns had fallen, the pig had gone back to the oak forest.